So the idea of this session is to look at how we record weeds in New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand, and how we record weed control. And so there are some tools that I know of, and I'll just list a few of them. iNaturalist, the good old Excel spreadsheet, Econet CAMS, Ground Truth's Weed Manager, Kitty Tayo out of Ethos Environmental, and I'm sure councils have many, and DOC have many other methods of recording weeds, and there's a new tool on the block coming called SWOT, which Nigel Sharman's working on. But the overarching sort of state of weed recording in New Zealand has been described by the Honourable Simon Upton as a bit of a dog's breakfast. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment wrote a report several years ago about weeds in New Zealand, lamenting the state of weed recording and how it's very hard to get a handle on what the situation is. There is no data standard for weeds or weed control in New Zealand. So we have a number of experts, shall we say, in the room tonight who I'm hoping will just be able to speak freely and answer some fairly open questions. And the open questions are, from me, what weed control recording systems do you use? And maybe if you've got some, you could share your spray diaries with the group. Are they fit for purpose? What are their weaknesses and strengths? What would you like to see in Aotearoa in this space? Data standards we have data standards for predator control, but there is no data standard for weed control or weeds. And would you like to see one? And if so, for those who've got hold some purse strings, how much are you prepared to pay to support a data standard for weeds? And what is the right agency to lead that work? What recording systems do we need to make a real impression on the weed burden in Aotearoa? And how important is it to you to have joined up national weed data recording? Or can we just keep on doing our own spreadsheets and the like? So that's basically about it, hopefully about as much as I'm going to say, and I might just not quite sure who to ask first. Can you help me out, Keith? Who should I ask? Who have we got on the panel? Who's
so
here?
We've got Murray Dawson is here,
yeah,
and Jeff Reed.
Yep.
And I just have to look down the list. I'm sorry.
We can come back with some more.
I don't think Viv Cole is here yet.
If you just let me know who else we've got.
Okay.
If we could start with Murray. Murray, welcome. And if you could introduce yourself and let the group know your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Kia ora tātou, everybody. I'm Murray Dawson. I'm a botanist at what used to be called Land Care Research at the Allen Herbarium, now part of the Bioeconomy Science Institute. I'm also a horticulturalist with the Royal New Zealand Institute of Horticulture and some other organisations, and a trustee of iNaturalist New Zealand. So that's me. I could run you through some of the iNaturalist tools first and then move on to a few other solutions, and that could get the conversation running from there. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yes, thanks.
I'll try and share my screen. Okay, can people see that Pest Plants project Yep. Good. So iNaturalist is a very comprehensive platform and solution, as well as New Zealand has a separate node which has a different website address, but it federates into the international platform as well. So practically speaking, it's just a different website address that keeps our own identity. And I won't run through all of the features of iNaturalist because I'm assuming that most of the audience is pretty savvy to that and how you upload individual observations and get IDs. So I'll run you through a few of the projects instead. This one is just a general project that was started by Colin Merck, and it's just designed as a capture for anyone interested in posting weeds of any description. And so you can think of these projects as kind of launch pads or ways of aggregating groups of observations together. As well as projects, you can drill through and do it in a different way where you look at regions and then see the observations there. Related to weeds, this one was started, as the description says, by Dave Holland. And this captures one of his interest areas, which are weeds that are dispersed by birds. So he's very, very good at making observations of seedlings and reliably identifying them, which captures the ability of an invasive species to spread right from the seedling stage. So that's one that he maintains, which has loads of observations in it. One that I created as a result of a follow-on workshop with the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, where he asked, well, where do you go for finding emergent or these new weed species that are popping up? Because that's a really important group to capture for the emergent species. And so I created this project here, which is a bit of a working list capturing 152 different species. Occasionally I'll take something off where I've decided that although it's potentially invasive, there's not strong enough evidence, or perhaps if something is too widespread to consider it as an emergent. So it is a working list basically, and a fairly useful one for keeping an eye on things that aren't on the official list, such as regional pest management strategies. And the problem with the RPMSs is that it can take several years for a newly invasive species to make its way on those lists, which then trigger the council responses. Although I have to say that the likes of Environment Canterbury have shifted their strategies to target invasives as being a more cost-effective approach of nipping newly emergents in the bud. So it is good to see that there has been a bit of a shift in focus there. And Kate McCombs has created an environmental weeds in New Zealand project, which is basically a direct mirroring of the new DOC environmental weeds list. So you could consider this as the equivalent iNaturalist project to complement that updated doc list of environmental weeds. So they are the major projects I can think of related to iNaturalist. There are a few tools, if I can, yeah, there we go. There are also a few tools within iNaturalist. So this computer vision demo page is where you have no idea what a plant, an invasive species might be, and you don't want to post it online, but you can drag and drop. So if I drop one of my images there, it doesn't matter if we know what it is, but the point is it loads the metadata up, and you can click, and if there's no metadata, you could, for example, choose all of New Zealand instead. But we'll carry on with the existing metadata, and then you hit classify. And what it does is it does an image matching process where, in this case, it's 100% identified Allium triquetrum reliably. I tend to use this to name all of my image files before I upload onto iNaturalist, and so it is quite a useful hack for doing a quick identification without necessarily posting onto iNaturalist. And so the power of iNaturalist is that it has what's called an API, an application programmer interface, which means that all sorts of other groups and organizations can use the back end of iNaturalist to create their own apps. So, for example, Find a Pest it's largely depreciated now, but that was created as a front end where regional councils who need to keep coordinates private, so weeds on private land that they don't want to post publicly, it was a way of being able to post or report plant and animal incursions within an app that has an iNaturalist back end, and you could choose to withhold those from the iNaturalist platform or to post onto there. Another app that does a similar thing was created by iNaturalist themselves called Seek. That was originally created as a smartphone app so that kids could identify plants and animals of all sorts without being exposed to well, it was the age laws in the States drove it. Seek has its own inbuilt image recognition for identification, so it's not as powerful as iNaturalist or the main iNat app, but it has been used by the likes of MPI and regional councils as a way of identification without necessarily posting. I know I'm throwing quite a lot of information out at you. PlantNet is an international app that isn't related to iNaturalist, but because it's got an international focus, it can reliably identify some weeds that we have in New Zealand, but it is outside of the iNat network, which means that you lose the ability to share the data through the global iNaturalist platform, and it doesn't federate data off to GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. That's just a fancy name for an international repository of data sets. And when you go to that site, you can extract absolute truckloads of data for lots of scientific purposes. So it means that people's observations and recordings aren't just sucked into a vacant black hole. It can be reused in as many ways as you can think about. And the other thing I wanted to talk about just very briefly is iNaturalist does have the dual role of identification through image recognition and human ID, as well as being able to record locations. But sometimes there is a place for dedicated identification apps as well. And my workplace has created quite a few of those. So they are what I would call, rather than just being able to take a photo and then an ID based on kind of a black box algorithm, these are more of a teaching and learning resource, which does predate a lot of the image recognition stuff. So for weeds, the key to weed species is the main one to be concerned about, although the grass key is a really good one too. So identifying grasses is quite specialized, and because most of them look so similar, something like iNaturalist or any of the image recognition stuff falls quite badly down. But with this key, it can walk you through the various characters in a much more powerful way. So that's where the power of those lucid keys is really helpful. But if we go back to the weeds key and run it, that's the web interface. They can be created using smartphone apps, and I've recently updated the native Coprosma app onto the App Store, which is looking really good. So basically it's the process of elimination where you go through and select various characters. So if we go stem, prickles, present, flowers, color yellow, for example, it's a process of elimination, and you'll get down to a range of species, and you can choose best characters to get to the next ones. And then when you're getting close to your answer, you can go through and look at the library of images to see whether it matches. So it is a very powerful platform that is more of a teaching feature. And just to finish off, of course, a lot of people use Facebook groups, and that is very mixed in terms of reliability. I do belong to a few plant identification groups on Facebook, but it is very much a here today, gone tomorrow situation, whereas some of the more formal platforms, as I said, you can reuse and reuse the data, and it contributes to citizen science rather than, as I say, just here today and gone tomorrow. So that's probably enough from me in terms of an overview of some of the tools that I use on a regular basis.
Thanks, Murray. Briefly, could we have your thoughts on a data standard for weed control in New Zealand, or weeds?
Yeah, there is something called the Darwin Core Standards, which is used from a taxonomic viewpoint. I have heard of quite recently about a ecological set of standards that is very similar to what what the Darwin core is, and that's getting close to what you're talking about, I suspect. And yeah, I think it's really important in the areas that you're working.
Great. Are you able to share that, the new one you mentioned? Maybe in the chat, if you could find that while someone else is talking, that would be very helpful. Thank you very much. That was very good, Murray. There's all sorts of things there I did not know. So thank you very much. Right, so Jeff Reed, and can I ask Keith to just remind me who else you could send me a private chat, maybe. So Jeff, would you like to let us know your thoughts?
Yeah.
And
First of all, can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, it's great to be on a chat with so many people talking weeds. I've got more of an operational background. We're right into drones, mapping and spraying weeds with drones. Yeah, obviously drones aren't the silver bullet to weeds, but we've certainly been able to make some good grounds. In the past, I've used iNaturalist for mapping weeds out on big landscapes, and then being able to export all of those data points has been really helpful. A project that comes to mind was in the Bay of Plenty for a catchment group. We did a 35,000 hectare survey, broke up the landscape into 1 kilometre square topograph squares, and ranked each invasive plant, gave them 1 to 4 rank, whether they were really common or abundant or not so common. And that was really interesting. I felt like we were doing something so caveman style, but we certainly coloured in a big catchment, and we could see where the weeds were, how they were spreading, the corridors, the roads, different land use types. And from there on, we were able to come up with a bit of a strategy with the funding that was available to help create exclusion zones and buffer zones. Yeah, that was interesting. At the moment, we're using LiDAR type drones to get very accurate waypoints of pest plants that are out of sight. And yeah, we're basically getting GPX or KML files, which are down to 10 mil accuracy, and they're proving very useful for our follow-up work with big spray drones, or giving them to ground crews and them going in and doing the manual work. So it's certainly sped things up, but one thing that I'd really like to see would be some sort of system similar to what CAMS is working on, where all the different agencies, volunteer groups can log in and see what weeds have been controlled, what herbicides being used. And yeah, I know we can do so much better. With the drones, we're able to not just create data points, but draw polygons on the map live, and yeah, sort of like measure exactly how big these patches of plants are and how they're being distributed. So it would be really neat for us to be able to feed all that data into a place where everyone can access it. Yeah, anyway, that's it from me.
That's great, Jeff. I think we probably need to have you on as a single speaker for an hour, telling us exactly how you do all this stuff. Well, that might be intellectual property. Who knows?
No, I'm happy to share. Yeah.
Good man.
Yeah.
Right. I think Scott Samble's arrived. Have you, Scott? Are you able to? I think you came in late, but basically, can you confirm you're there, Scott? If you are, you're muted. Certainly saw his name up there. So if Scott, you are available, just put your hand up or something. Right, so is there anybody else that Keith has invited to our panel? Viv Cole was a possibility. I don't know if you're here.
I see. Yeah, no, I haven't heard back from Viv Cole. She said she would come. And Mike Beach from Horizons, who's also the convener of Weedbusters, has got the flu, so he can't be here. But I see some interesting guests who I wasn't expecting. If I'm right, James Russell, who I remember gave the opening address when Pest Free Kaipātahi was formed, is on the call. If he had comments, that would be great to hear.
James
just replied. Scott's on Great Barrier.
Scott's on Great Barrier. I'll just chip in and say I'm spending time at the zoo at home, so I'm working on that. Yeah, I'm trying to bring a lens of I've work at the University of Auckland, but have taken up a role as senior advisor to the Next Foundation, and I think as Richard identified, predator control has the luxury of being perhaps an easier problem to solve and being a few steps ahead of the weed problem. And we've seen about probably a decade ago the shift towards the data centralization and the data standards and the importance of that. So having just run the Island Invasives Conference earlier this year, I think there's the need and the opportunity to both to work towards data standards. And I think what we've learned from the predator space is you ultimately see pluralism, that there is no ring to rule them all, no software to rule them all, but everyone's going to use their own thing based on historical legacy or something. But if they can all be operable, and sometimes you have meta software, I guess you might say, not meta itself, but software that unifies them and brings them together, which I know EcoNet works towards very well. I think if we can just keep that momentum going, then we can end up with keeping that momentum going and working towards an approach to weeds that mirrors what we're doing very successfully with predator control. But I think Richard identified some of the key ingredients, which is that you need an organization to take lead on it and act as the glue. So we see in the Predator Free New Zealand movement that DOC is the lead host agency. I forget how they exactly fashion themselves since Predator Free 2050 Limited folded, but DOC are the lead implementing organization, but you have the Predator Free New Zealand Trust and other players bringing together different aspects of the community to what's overall a movement. So yeah, just here with that lens to see what's going on in the scene and what we can do help going forward. But I'll hand it over to Scott. I'm keen to hear what he says, having been a predator control man himself, but now, well, working on the darker, harder side. Ka pai.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Scott is traveling. Are you there, Scott?
I think he's still in his truck or transport. I think we'll hear from him as soon as he arrives.
Right. Nigel Sharman.
I'm happy to say a few words, Richard, and I see we've got Roald stuck his hand up as well, actually, who I was going to ask. So
But if you could just introduce yourself, Nigel. I think most people know who you are, but that would be good.
Yes, I'm Nigel Charman. I'm a developer with EcoNet, and I'm also working with Kate on the Smart Weed Alert tool at DOC. So one thing we've done with CAMS is to allow people to update other people's observations with the weed control status. It's using a feature in iNaturalist that lets you add additional fields onto someone else's weed records. And I think that's really key, that we don't tie ourselves into the person that can update it has to be the same person that reported it. Any person can find a weed and the different person can go and control it. So that's one thing with updates of weed status. And I'm trying to push that through GBIF at the moment. There's a invasive species group as part of TDWG, which they're defining the Darwin core standards that Murray mentioned. So we're having a CAMS case study getting published by that group, and working with them to try and get some of these ideas through to the GBIF standards. Ultimately, it'd be great if on GBIF you could somehow update someone else's observations with some metadata to say, you know, the current status of that weed. That was probably the main thing I would.
Can you just expand on TDWC for the group, please? Nigel?
TDWG is, I think so. I was going to look it up. Technical Design Working Group or something. They've got awful names, these things. But it's basically a group defining some biosecurity standards for this data standard called Darwin Core. It's being used by the GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which is a big global database that there's about 200 publishers of weed data within New Zealand to that database, including iNaturalist, regional councils, MBI Doc, etc.
And TDWG is based in.
They're global. It's probably European centred, but there are Australians on the group and various other nationalities.
Thanks very much. Yeah, Scott Samble is on Great Barrier in a van with no reception. So that's all great. So thanks, Nigel.
Rolled next.
Rolled, yeah.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Roald Bowman's based down in Wellington, working for Kaitiaki Otinahiri. We're a contracting company doing a lot of weed control work. I sort of help with our data side of things, and there's a few different avenues I've come across. Some councils are starting to put together their own sort of collection databases because they're running into, I think, the biggest issue they run into is the consistency between people who are doing work and sort of what data is being collected, which is of course the topic of this conversation. Yeah, there's a few different avenues that I've come across as being available, a lot of different ways to collect things like Jeff touched on for waypoints and polygons. And I think the biggest thing that I've picked up on in terms of what I'd like to see would be that consistency in terms of trying to standardize. I think there's good tools available to collect the data, but standardizing what it is we're collecting to sort of give us a strategic view on what we're managing, how it's distributed, because I think you could do a lot of different tweaking to get it to different levels of granularity, and sort of having a clear idea of what it is we want as an outcome to guide the management would be great. I'm interested in seeing how we can split the data, so what we're recording in terms of the different species, but also the life stages and how fine scale we can make it before it becomes overbearing and difficult to manage and actually get anything out of it. Yeah, it is something I would like to sort of see a bit more standardized. One of the biggest first distinguishing points, I guess, would be polygons versus the waypoints. It's a bit of I've often thought, what's the best way to go around doing that? Because polygons, obviously, for really big areas is super useful, but I think waypoints could allow us to sort of refine it a bit more as well. Like iNaturalist is already sort of lending itself to do that, and if we can sort of have a more accurate fine scale pinpoint of where mature infestations are and where seedling infestations are and those sorts of things, we might be able to use that as a way to sort of get an idea of the distributions and where hotspots are and how they're moving throughout the landscape. Yeah, I think that, and then good information and consistent recording on when things have been managed making sure we consistently are recording as much as we can whenever we're visiting throughout areas. So if you're not managing it, but you notice something new, recording it along the way, recording when you controlled and how you controlled, and then being sure that when you go and follow up on those points that you make those recordings again and again, so we can kind of see over time. I think the more data we get, you'll be able to see if something's effective by that changing size, the changing distribution of waypoints and things like that would be a great asset in empowering ourselves, because I think a lot of great work is being done, but it's really hard to have a structured approach and feel like something's being done when you don't have the consistent data set over time to back it up and guide yourself. Yeah, so a bit of a rambling, but there's a few a few thoughts I've had over the years looking at what data is being collected and the struggles. Another thing I think as well is, it's a classic issue with data, but the free-form input versus controlling. Really hard to manage those databases when you have text input, and a lot harder for people to put in the right information when it's blank fields versus a bit more structured. That would be really great to see, because it'll make actually getting information out of that so much easier.
Thanks very much. You said that there are a lot of good tools available. Do you want to just expand on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of councils are starting to try and use like the ARC maps to collect waypoints and data points and things like that. There's sort of, I think that's the main issue, is what tool is actually being used as a central point. You've got iNaturalist, which you could collect waypoints on. If you wanted to, you could use, I'm sure like Google Maps or anything like that. There's the ARC tools. There's a few different apps there that councils are using. Things I think we've seen like Fulcrum and things as well. It's sort of endless opportunities for that data collection, and they offer those ways to kind of create forms and things. So yeah, I think it's the main part would be trying to standardize what's collected in it. So because obviously different people have different access, there's different paywalls. So as long as we kind of are collecting that same information through them, whether you're working internally for a council or central organisation, government organisation, or whether you're in a volunteer group, being able to integrate those together would be really great. Yeah.
And you also mentioned in terms of the granularity causing input fatigue.
Yeah.
Where's the balance? Because if in a organisation like yours, I guess your staff are paid and they've got to do the input, whether they're fatigued or not. And then, but I there's no doubt that if it's too hard, it won't happen.
Yeah, I think that's where having those predefined fields is really useful. The easier if we know the outcomes we want, then that is a great tool, because I suppose it depends on what sort of program you're running. If you're working on an eradication program for a known site, you want to know where a seedling is and where it's popped up, whether that's 100 meters from a hotspot you had or in the middle of it. And at the same point, I'm kind of interested in seeing when we are recording at a location, that sort of level of detail, splitting it from just seedlings or fruiting individuals, knowing actually where those are, instead of just recording one big area that is sort of a jumble of everything. Yeah, I think if the data setup is right, it shouldn't be terribly fatiguing compared to the work itself of actually doing the control work. It can be quite quick. Sorry, it's a bit hard to articulate exactly on that line. I suppose it depends on what we find useful. In the early stages, sort of larger, more broad scale data is probably useful, because you might have these sort of widespread mature issues, and then being sure to get more granular as you get further into the management program, perhaps, or. But yeah, I think the main thing is if you're not having to type in everything, that would be a really useful asset, because it would be A, easier for people to record, but B, also lend itself better to the actual analysis on the other side of things.
Thank you very much. Keith, you got your hand up. And your microphone off.
Yep. Sorry for the delay. Thank you very much, Roel. That was great to hear. I'm sorry I didn't see your email this morning to say that you'd be coming. I was at a weeding bee. Yeah, I wanted to pick up on one of the points you made and ask you and possibly others whether you might be able to comment on it. I've been involved in two what we call hit squads. One that does door knocking around the Kaipatiki area. The other mainly works in the bush, but also does some door knocking in adjacent properties. And what I've found frustrating over the past 9 years is the lack of integration of data between various agencies. So, for example, we took a group into our local bush reserve, and one of the young women came back and said, "Why am I getting blue stuff all over my hands?" And we had no idea that the contractors had been through there the day before. They told us they're going to be there 2 weeks prior, but we didn't know they were there the day before. Also, I find it frustrating that we don't know where they've actually worked. So we don't know whether we're doubling up on what they have done, or we don't know where they haven't been, so we don't know to focus on those areas. And I'd really like to see a much more greater degree of integration and visibility of data between different agencies. With a certain city council, there's a reporter problem app, and people report weeds on that app, and they'll often get a reply to say, the job's been done. And you go back there a week later, 3 weeks later, 2 months later, and the job hasn't been done. It's just been passed over to the contractors. So there's a variety of areas where the communication between the different agencies is very poor. And when we first started asking for more 15 years ago, the contractors were using pen and paper and spreadsheets. But I think with GIS, I'd really love to see the sharing of data. We've had very useful discussions recently with DOC in Auckland, and I'd really like to think that the groups that do work out in some of the Gulf Islands that are using CAMs at the moment, it would be great to know, great to be able to share that data with DOC, with their new weed app as well. So I'd be interested in comments from people as to what they think the possibility is of sharing data between council agencies, government agencies, their contractors, community groups and volunteers like the members of STAMP. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. John, you had your hand up, but then put it down. So.
I actually meant to react and give a clap rather than put my hand up. Sorry. I was just completely agreeing with exactly what Keith was saying, and that I do agree we should be having one sort of combined system whereby everybody that's operating in any given geographic area is using the same system to be able to know what work's been done by any person at any time. That seems like it should be a relatively straightforward thing to do. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think that's likely to be some sort of meta system like they have in the health service. They have a whole lot of different software portals around the country and general practice and hospitals, but there is a shared data set which with the appropriate security people can see. So, and that is probably what we need. I don't know. In terms of feedback to Econet, those who are using Econet CAMs, rather than talk, put your hand up now, would really love you to send us your frank thoughts about what works and what doesn't, and what you would like to see next in CAMs. We've started work on a polygon-based recording system, but it's really embryonic. because the point-based system that we currently have just doesn't work for the working bees that I run. So that's that. And if anybody is using Ground Truth Weed Manager and you would like to make comments now, you can put your hand up and say what you think, what's good and what's not good about it. Otherwise, if there's anybody else on the call who would like to put their thoughts forward about data standards or what they would like to see, or to expand on what they've already said, please put your hand up and we'd love to hear from you. Right, Shona. Can't hear you, Shona. While you're sorting out your microphone, we might go to Martina. Hi, Martina.
All right, hello. I have a part-time job with Pure Conservation Trust, and we use Weed Manager. That's the only one we use. I like Weed Manager, but it took quite a while to get my head around it. I didn't find it terribly easy, and I find it quite limited on the phone. So I find it better on my desktop. So I find it really useful to add data, put data in that have been out in the field, but I don't find it fantastic out in the field itself. I find it a bit limited, and of course you need internet and all that as well. But I really like Weed Manager because for me it means I put that data in, and then if I ever get replaced or I have to pass on data to a colleague or so, they can just go in and have a look. For example, Taiwan Cherry is my next project. They've just started flowering in Whangarei, and I'm sure Mangawhai will be next in about a week or so. So I've got all my information in there. I can just go and look up in the area that's relevant for me, and then put in that I've done a treatment such and such and all that. So yeah, that's what we use. That's what I have to use. That's what the boss is saying.
Thank you.
That works well.
And the data in Weed Manager is not visible to the next door neighbour project or anybody else working in your area, or is it?
I think they could get a login. If they get a login, I think it is. But it's not automatically. It's not just sitting in a pool and then anybody can look at it. It's not like that.
Okay. Anybody else like to give us their thoughts on the direction of weed control recording, or how we go about setting up a data standard in Aotearoa?
I'm hopeful I've sorted my mic issues out now.
Yep, you have.
Great. Sorry, it's Shona here from Stewart Island, the Stewart Island Rakiura Community and Environment Trust. I just wanted to echo the point that I think it was John made about being unable to see other control that's been done. So we use ArcGIS product called Field Maps for our Darwin's Barberry control program. And we find it pretty good. It's point-based, and that works well for us. But Environment Southland and the Department of Conservation are also all operating in our area, and we don't have any visibility of each other's systems, really. We sometimes receive a little bit of funding from Environment Southland, and in that case, we pass our data back to them, but I don't know if it gets entered into a system or what happens, and I never see the data of the points in the weeds that they've controlled when they come over and visit. which can be a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, it's a recurring issue. And of course, if I come to fly to Stewart Island, and I won't be able to see that data of yours either. So even if I wanted to come and have a little bit of a working bee on Stewart Island, which I probably won't be, but you know what I mean. So that's where you should talk to us about cams, because we use field maps, and might be the way to go.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
Yep. Anyone else? Martine, you've still got your hand up, but assuming you've said all you need to. Scott.
Hey, Scott.
Welcome.
I've just been on an incredible adventure across Altea, and I've found a place right up the north in this magical faraway place called Port Fitzroy, where they have a Starlink internet connection. And at the moment, I'm just rummaging through my bag here to try and find an external screen so that I can actually see everybody, because there's quite a lot of people involved here. I did manage to hear some talk on the way up. I had my headphones in the car as I was coming in and out of reception. But if you want me to ramble on about something, we probably only have 5 minutes left in the meeting now.
Yeah,
let me know, Richard.
So what's the direction of weed control systems in Aotearoa? How do we organise a data standard? What works and what doesn't?
Okay, this is my 2 minutes. What have I got now?
Yeah,
6 minutes. Elevator pitch. Kia ora, everybody. So sorry for not being able to join, but you know that's the life of traveling from island to island doing this type of stuff. So just my history of weed standards, pest plant standards, as I've been involved in it the last 6 or 7 years, is a guy called Sam Stevens tried to get us all in the room. He was from Bay of Plenty Regional Council at the time, to actually make a pest plant standard, starting with all of the regional councils and MPI and DOC. And all we sort of managed to do in those first few years is get Bay of Plenty Regional Council to all be talking the same language. Fortunately, though, their mates over the hill at Waikato Regional Council said, that's a really good idea what you guys got there. Does that work? Does that data standard, it wasn't a data standard, does that schema that you've got work? And they said, yeah, no, it works really well. And so we basically just copy and pasted the Bay of Plenty system into Waikato Regional Council system. And then, of course, their neighbours to the north, not quite neighbours, but neighbours across Auckland, Northland, saw what these guys are doing. And they said, hey, we'd like something like that as well. So, hey, look, this is starting to go national. Can we please, everybody, can we make sure we're using the same, reasonably the same schema? And they said, yeah, we can do that. So we'd really like to make sure we comply with what MPI have got. So, well, that's great, because we want MPI to be compliant with this as well. But they weren't involved right back in the early days of the talks. And so basically the Bay of Plenty schema and then the Waikato Regional Council schema and then Northland evolved a little bit as it was going north. And actually just before that time, I would say around that time, is when the Auckland Council's Ruru started getting up and running as well. And so we had to talk to like Amanda and Cap when they were talking about how we're going to set this up. We said, hey, you'll be really good if you loosely base this on what the other councils are doing. And now Bay of Plenty's been going for at least 70 years now. It's even gone through a couple of evolutions and a couple of upgrades. MPI are definitely getting on board as well. Everyone's schema will talk to each other, going through some kind of transmogrifier to say, well, if I drop a point here on the top of the Kaimai, it doesn't matter if I'm in Bay of Plenty or in the Waikato, I can still treat it. And I can still say, well, you guys used slightly different language than what we use, but we know that it's been visited 3 times. We know that it was this geometry, for example, if it's a polygon, we know it was this amount of cover, and I came over the hill and I treated your polygon, and I can say now that it has reduced in size by this much. The other thing that we've done a lot of is being able to do your spray diaries as well. So that's very, very regimented, because you have to report that to the EPA if you're doing it over water, for example. So it was easy to keep everyone on the same standard with that. It's like, well, let's just keep it so that the EPA can ingest that information. Unfortunately, we still send it to them as spreadsheets. They haven't quite got themselves into the system just yet, so that we can say, I'm just going to tap in this wherever we can. But the next big step at the moment is to get MPI to actually be able to connect to the regional council systems and not have to actually send them files all the time. So that's my goal in life. is to be able to get all of these different systems to be talking to each other, so there isn't all this data handling all the time, and to try and force everyone into this little box to say, look, can we try and keep these standards, these schemas as close to possible, so one day we'll be able to call them the data standard. That's me.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're coming up 6 o'clock. Are there any questions for Scott, or Keith, you got your hand up again?
Could I just ask Scott, are those standards publishable, available to see?
So it's a funny thing when you look at it. It's like, well, whose intellectual property is this? And because the guys at Bay of Plenty, who did all the hard yards, originally came up with this, and they've just said, yeah, of course we want everyone else to be using the same thing. So I'm more than happy to, like, if we wanted to set something up where, with everyone's permission, and maybe I can show some real data as well, to say, okay, this is how these guys do this. This is how they say this is the location. This is how we say this is what the geometry of it, and this is how eventually, because this is the goal, one day we say this is where it was historically, but it doesn't exist anymore. The last time that we inspected it was this time, and there may be some dormant seed there somewhere. We may have to cut back in 5 years' time and check it, but I'm more than happy to, when we've got more time, because I realise I've got 1 more minute left in this meeting, to actually talk through how we came up with this schema, what it is, how it evolved, and how it hopefully relates to MPI's standards as well.
Thanks. Nikki, you've got your hand up. You'll be the last question.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Scott. I just thought it might be useful for you to give 30
Nikki.
seconds. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So Scott and I are working together quite a lot at the moment on a version of Kititaio Waikato, so very much based on the Bay of Plenty system, but we have just developed a schema for, and in fact, well, Scott has, and in fact, a prototype for a pest plant module for community groups. And so I thought there's quite a lot of community groups on this call, Scott, so you might want to give a 30-second summary of what that's all about and how that might fit into the picture.
If I've still got 30 seconds, everyone's not sick of hearing from me so far. Okay, so the actual history of this one came from, okay, so Bay of Plenty said, hey, this is all very well. We've got these I wouldn't say complex, but to the average viewer who hasn't actually seen GIS work in the flesh before, they might go, wait, what's a related record? What do you want me to do? What's a parent point? Why do this seems too complex to me. So what we did for Bay of Plenty is we created this quite simple schema and we called it the Open Weeds Database, the OWD. And of course, Waikato said, can we have one of those as well? So we said, yeah, okay. So basically what these people do is they just, they're community groups. We can't force them to say, you must go back and you must say how many times you've repeated it and how many times you treated it and what herbicide you used and that type of stuff. So we kept it really, really simple for them, so they could drop a point or a polygon, and then they could say, well, I went back there, I treated it a couple of times, I don't think it's there anymore. But then when we did this for the Open Weeds database for Nikki's project, for Kititaio, it got like, okay, so we can actually use the technology we've got now. So we use ArcGIS, and we created this the Kititaio system, which is based off a Bay of Plenty system. And so basically what these guys, these community groups can do now is they can drop a point and they can create a polygon, and they can choose not to revisit it and do a related record, because that might be a bit too much. But if they want to, they can actually turn that into a relational database. They can go back and treating it and making sure that the thing has disappeared. The beauty of this, though, is that even though it's so much simpler than the full-on original Bay of Plenty schema, it still talks to it. So what we do is, if you've got a heap of community groups out there and they're going, wow, I'm seeing a lot of Manchurian wild rice at the moment, and someone's sitting there going, yeah, sure it is. Really? Do you think it is? And it's like, oh, I think I found some Madagascan ragwort. And are you sure it's Madagascan ragwort? And you can treat that community data with a grain of salt until it's like, a lot of people are saying this. I think we should go out there. And then once you go out there, you can confirm it and it becomes part of the authoritative database. So, these things can get misdiagnosed by people who aren't professionals, but they can also suddenly become part of the authoritative database if a pest plant officer goes out there and goes, oh, they're right, it is too, and it's really getting away from us here. Press the button, this becomes authoritative and it becomes part of their system.
Great, thanks. Keith, do you want to wrap up? And then I'll ask Tabitha to give the closing karakia, and if people want to stay on the call and chat, then that's fine.
Yeah, I hadn't planned to wrap up, but I'd just like to thank everybody very much for coming along. Great to hear what you had to say, Scott, about your system. And I did wonder, but perhaps we can chat afterwards about whether an iNaturalist interface could work in a similar way. Because the work that Nigel Charman has done to interface iNaturalist to CAMS, to me, is the answer to a prayer, because it allows everybody to be a citizen scientist, and then to get experts. I mean, I've even had Murray Dawson checking out some of my observations on iNaturalist, which I really appreciate. But thank you all for coming along. It's great to see such good numbers turning out. And thank you, Richard, for convening the panel. And my apologies for not reading my emails before the session. I had a working bee and I was writing up the notes. But hope you can all come along to the next session. And if you're not already signed up for the Environmental Weed Coalition, please do. And if anybody would like to take over from me in coordinating this or help me, I turn 80 this year, so I'm very keen to have some help. Thank you, everybody, and hand over to you, Tabitha.